Okay, looks like everybody's ready. So let us begin our third webinar on the rise and the fall of the Third Reich. Germany, just before World War II would be beginning. This was a very, very unique period, and not only in German history, but in world history. During this period of time, we saw the end of World War I, which was unfortunately for Germany, we had a little problem with what they called the Treaty of Versailles, which we have gone over before. But within this surrender document, the German people and the German government were basically handed something that they couldn't live with, and that was the treaty itself. The surrender document contained 444 clauses within the document, and 414 out of those 444 clauses were specifically to punish and to make Germany pay for World War I. As our two previous webinars pointed out, and what the history books tell us and what eyewitness accounts tell us, obviously Germany did not start this war. They were simply brought in as a participant in the war because of treaties that were signed and alliances that were signed many years prior to World War I beginning. But as a result of World War I, Germany was stripped of their military, they were stripped of their money, had to pay war reparations, and all of their overseas territories were taken from them as well. Obviously, that was a bad deal for the German people, but was even worse is when we had the Great Depression. When the American stock market crashed in October of 1929, the American economy was devastated, but that also carried over to the European economy. In fact, all the world economies were in big trouble. Germany was especially hit very, very hard because they were already in trouble because of what happened on the Treaty of Versailles. But now all of a sudden we got something even worse. Now, prior to the Great Depression and prior to all the difficulties that had, this is something that was terrible, and Adolf Hitler would start to assume a leadership role in the country. So we are going to have a PowerPoint presentation today. I'm going to basically pick up where I left off. I just wanted to go over with you some of the things preceding today's discussions about what happened. And as Hitler was becoming more and more prominent in Germany, he became obviously more and more powerful as time would be going on. As a result of that, people began to accept Hitler as the leader because he was doing something that the prior leadership was not able to do. And that is essentially promise the German people that it would be a way better situation for them personally and professionally if he were to become their chancellor, which he would become in 1932. But he had this strong sense of German unity and nationalism. Now, when you are a society that's been devastated by World War I, hungry, destitute, poor, and basically doing terrible, you are going to listen to what Hitler had to say, and they did, and they listened very carefully. So let's get through this thing. Let's start the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, I hope everybody can see the screen. The intrigue begins as this is where we begin our PowerPoint presentation today. Due to growing Nazi violence, Chancellor Heinrich Brüning invokes Article 48 and bans the SA and the SS. General Kurt von Schleicher, wanting to lead Germany himself, holds secret meetings proposing with Hitler that they would do this if Hitler would support his government. Hitler would agree to this, but then it would be very clear in very near future that Chancellor Brüning was forced to resign, effective ending the democracy in Germany. The political bargain that was met and that was done was Hitler would become Chancellor of Germany. This was obviously very important. Now, some of the things that that would begin to become very obvious to people is that Hitler was not going to be just the Chancellor of Germany. He had much, much greater ambitions. And it wasn't very long after that he became Chancellor that he would now become, for the most part, dictator. How did this happen? How did the people give him this much power? Because he didn't just take it, they gave it to him. So let's figure this out. Let's read this and see what exactly happened. Very interesting. Okay, April 13th, 1932. After the April 10th election, there was a noticeable increase in Nazi violence. By now, there were over 400,000 stormtroopers leading the leadership of the SA, Chief Ernst Röhm, made in the German Democratic Republic, came to believe that SA were about to take over by force. Many SA members saw themselves to be true revolutionary army. Hitler had to rein them in from time to time so they wouldn't upset his carefully laid plans to undermine the Republic. Hitler knew that he could not succeed as a leader of Germany without the support of the existing institutions, such as the German army and the powerful German industrialists. He understood that. In fact, Hitler understood that so well, the fact that he would promise them that if he were to become chancellor, business would be a lot better for Germany under Hitler's leadership. And the proof of that was when Germany would become under Hitler's leadership, one of the first things he did was simply to rebuild the German military or the army and everything else they had. This was something very important to Hitler's plans. He knew two things that were going to happen because of that. One is that Hitler wanted the military, and so did the country of Germany, to have a strong military because they were once one of the leading powers of Europe, and they should have that again. And they didn't care about what the Treaty of Versailles said because everybody else in Europe was in trouble too because of the Great Depression. First thing is first, we have to rebuild our military. And when you do that, when you do rebuild your military, what happens to the economy? In Germany's case, like in World War II, when the United States would come into this, their economy increased dramatically. More people were working, more people were making money, more people had money to spend. So the economy goes up when the Germans start to rebuild not only the military, but their entire economy through work programs. Hitler understood that. We must build our people if we're going to have a powerful Germany. To have a powerful Germany, which means that Hitler himself would become much more powerful and would eventually become the Führer. So let's continue with this. Hitler's opportunity did not come along in the form of General Kurt von Schleicher, a scheming army officer who wanted to lead Germany himself. Schleicher became a major figure behind the scenes in the cabinet of the Chancellor, Heinrich Brüning, from 1930 to 1932. Interesting. Serving as an aide to the Minister of Defense, he established a close relationship with President Hindenburg, who simply was beginning to become very ill. Schleicher wanted to lead Germany himself. He wanted to impose a permanent authoritarian right-wing government independent of the Reichstag and backed by the army. Interesting. He established a close relationship. And to that end, he held a secret meeting with Hitler proposing lifting the ban on the SA and the SS, dissolving the Reichstag, holding new elections and dumping Chancellor Brüning if Hitler would support his government. Hitler would agree. This is one of the stepping stones that we talked about with Hitler beginning to assert himself as the future Chancellor of Germany. In the eyes of Schleicher and Hitler, Brüning was in the way that they had to go. Schleicher went to work undermining Brüning's position with Hindenburg, and Brüning was already in trouble with Hindenburg. Hindenburg blamed Brüning for making him run for re-election against Hitler at the age of 85. Interesting. Okay. So let's take a look at this and find out what's going on. Okay, so you got Franz von Papen appointed Chancellor in 1932. Papen lifts the ban on SA and the SS, and it's called Bloody Sunday. He enjoyed a peculiarity of being taken seriously by neither his friends or his enemies. He was reputed to be a superficial, blundering, untrue, ambitious, vain and crafty intriguer. That's what they called him. Interestingly enough, the cabinet which Papen formed with the assistance of General von Schleicher was known as the Cabinet of Barons. and was already regarded with ridicule by Germans. Can you understand why the German people didn't trust any of these people? The German economy was failing and had failed, and Germany was, for the most part, at this point, still in pretty deep trouble. Hitler was not he was part of the power structure, but he didn't quite have the power yet, but that would change very soon. On June 14th, Papen lifted the ban on the SA and SS as promised, and murder and violence erupted all over Germany. Remember, many different factions were fighting for power. But keep something in mind, everybody, and this is what's very important. Hitler's Nazis were still growing by numbers and by power. If you were to go to Nuremberg in 1932 and you were to see a Nazi rally at Nuremberg, you would be able to begin to understand very clearly what the overall thrust of the German people was all about. Because the Reichstag and all this other stuff was beginning to divide Germany, Hitler's plan under the Nazi regime that he was leader of was bringing Germany together. And people were smart enough at that time to realize that Hitler was the worst, or was by far the lesser of two evils. They didn't understand what Hitler's ultimate goal was. Nobody did until when we're going to get to that, when we get to 1937, 1938. Okay, so we're still quite a ways from that. Okay, so here's what happened. Well, let me read the rest of this. On July 17th, Bloody Sunday, a big shootout occurred in a communist area near Hamburg, 19 killed and nearly 300 wounded. Papen invoked Article 48 and declared martial law in Berlin. He also took over the government of the state of Prussia. Hitler decided at that point that he must go. Okay, so here's what happened. You can see all of these different parties that were all beginning to coalesce, and they realized that one obvious was the NSDAP Nazis. They were growing in power and by quantity. Okay, as of 1932, July, Reichstag elections approached. Germany's economic and political crisis obviously worsened. We've been going over that. Why? Because there were riots all over Germany. People were trying to assume power all over Germany. And still, there were still 6 million people that were unemployed because of Germans' prior problems with the Treaty of Versailles itself and the Great Depression that was looming all over the world. In fact, almost 50% of Germany's union members were unemployed. That's terrible. Okay, in the July 1932 election, the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag, obviously, by taking 37%. But note that 63% of the Germans did not cast their vote in the elections of Germany. But there was a peak of the Nazi party in a free election, yet they still did not have the majority necessary to pass legislation. However, Papen had called these elections to strengthen his position in the Reichstag. That did not happen as well. Hitler broke his promise to support Papen, and once again, Germany was ruled by emergency decrees. As the largest party in the Reichstag, the NSDAP chose Hermann Göring, a war hero and close associate of Hitler, as the presiding officer of the legislature. Interestingly enough, Hitler was now fully infiltrated in almost all political dealings with the internal structure of Germany, German politics. This was very, very interesting. As president, it was Hindenburg's job to appoint a chancellor. It was customary for the leader of the largest party to hold this office. Again, Hindenburg overlooked Adolf Hitler. He did not believe Hitler's agenda would serve the nation well. Papen remained chancellor for the time being, but that would be changing very quickly now. Okay, let's keep this thing going. Now keep in mind, all this time, Hitler was getting more and more powerful with the German people. Okay, chancellorship. Hitler's presents his demand. Vice chancellorship. He wanted chancellorship, he got vice. 3 cabinet positions for Nazis, creation of a propaganda ministry, control over the Ministry of Interior, control of Prussia, and passage of the Enabling Act giving him control by decree. This was not happening yet. However, Germany remained a presidential dictatorship Any attempt by the Reichstag to oppose emergency decrees was met by a dissolution. Okay, August 5th, 1932, President Hindenburg, Chancellor Papen, and General Kurt von Schleider, Hindenburg's closest advisor and minister, met with Adolf Hitler. Hitler would now basically present his demands. Like I just read, he wanted the chancellorship, 3 positions in the cabinet, creation of the propaganda ministry. Hitler was so confident that he had the SS amassing in Berlin, take over. Something was beginning to happen, but Hindenburg distrusted Hitler, especially after his behavior prior to this area. Interestingly enough, August 13, 1932, Schleider and Papen met with Hitler. They offered a compromise. Hitler could be vice chancellor, and the NSDAP could select the Russian minister of the interior. Hitler became very angry. He refused. He spewed threats of violence and murder. Not a very nice thing, I should say. The newly elected Reichstag, heavily Nazi party, gave a vote of no confidence to Papen and his government. As a result of that, Papen ordered the Reichstag dissolved and called for a new election in November. Okay, let's continue this. Okay. Von Papen secretly plans Hitler-Papen government, 1932. Okay, in January 3, 1932, Papen secretly plans a Hitler-Papen government. Unbeknownst to Schleider, Papen was holding secret meetings with Hitler. And Papen, driven by desire for revenge, wanted to bring down Schleider. His plans to become co-chancellor with Hitler and form a coalition with the NSDAP and the DNVP, leading German parties, was basically shot down. Hitler liked the idea, but insisted that he would have to be chancellor, promising that he would work with Papen and his ministers. Hitler wanted everything for himself. This has become very interesting. Papen agreed. All they needed now was the consent of Hindenburg. Keep in mind, Hindenburg was 85 years old. Didn't quite have enough oomph to really start to oppose dynamic leaders that we were looking at forming. In the meantime, Schleider heard about this and went running to Hindenburg, charging Papen with treachery. In this case, it would be treason. Hindenburg was beginning to have his misgivings about Schleider. Schleider was failing miserably at his attempts to form a coalition government. When Schleider approached Hindenburg requesting emergency powers and another dissolution of the Reichstag, Hindenburg refused, and Schleider was dismissed. July 28th, 1933, Schleider resigns, and Hindenburg forced Schleider to resign formally at that point. Hindenburg was exhausted by all this intrigue. He was 85 years old, and as much as he hated to, he seemed resigned to offer Hitler the high government position of chancellor. Many people were urging him to do so. The industrialists, remember, who were financing Adolf Hitler, the military whose connections Hitler had cultivated, as we talked about earlier, even Hindenburg's own son, who backed Nazi government of Adolf Hitler. As a result, having a soft spot for Papen, Hindenburg authorized Papen to finalize the negotiations with Hitler, and Hitler came to power accordingly, was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Now, this is very interesting because it only took a matter of 52 days from Adolf Hitler's chancellorship to where he would now be the Führer and unconditional leader of Germany. So let's find out how he did this. Okay. I think I can go a little bit further with this. Okay, great. Okay. Hindenburg was still on the fence. The last straw came on January 29th. An unfounded rumor swept through Berlin that Schleider was about to attempt a military coup, arrest Hindenburg, and establish a military dictatorship. Alarmed, Hindenburg wasted no time in offering Adolf Hitler the chancellorship, thought it was his last resort to save the republic. Okay, interesting. Papen and Hitler organized a new government. Only 3 of the cabinet positions would go to Nazis, yet they were three key positions. Yeah, I'm not going to get into all this. I believe Ivy has this PowerPoint, but let's see how Hitler would maneuver this. Interestingly enough, take a look at the PowerPoint here. This is exactly what would happen. Vice Chancellor and Premier of Prussia was Franz von Papen. Minister of the Interior, Wilhelm Frick, and Minister of Public Interior of Prussia, Hermann Göring. Very, very powerful allies of Adolf Hitler. Okay, Hitler's rise to power. Okay, we had the birth of the Nazi Party, the Weimar Republic, the beer hall. We had the Nazis became a legitimate party. We just learned about how Hitler became chancellor through the intrigue and through the maneuvering through the German political system. Now we have something that happened. The Reichstag fire on the February 27th, 1933. We would have emergency decree, the Enabling Act, Night of Long Knives, and now Hitler becomes Führer. It would only take 4 months before he would become Führer, but he actually would become Führer actually only 52 days. 4 months, it was completely finalized, but he actually began more power and most power of powers granted the Führer only 52 days after he would become Chancellor of Germany. Okay, so here we go. Hitler was appointed Chancellor. Hitler was appointed Chancellor under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which granted the president the authority to invoke dictatorial power to protect the democratic order from his overthrow. A clause originally inserted to ensure against a feared communist revolution. Even with Hitler's appointment, most high-ranking officers of the army maintained their loyalty to Hindenburg. Remember, he was the president of the country. They revered General Marshal of the World War I and the president of Germany. Looking down on Hitler, they considered him an ex-lance corporal, a mere enlisted man to be arrogant, undereducated, and a dangerous adventurer. This is how people thought of Hitler, a dangerous adventurer and an undereducated, weak little man. Still, they recognized Hitler's loyal SA militia of nearly 1 million jackbooted stormtroopers were dangerous adversaries to their small army, which was restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. So you see how Hitler became more powerful. He had a bigger army than the government. The Nazis became much more powerful. Very interesting. The prevailing wisdom was that the Nazis had been tricked. It was actually thought that the best way to deal with the NSDAP was to let them in power. But they would actually have to make the policy. They could no longer be anything to everybody. Interesting. Hitler's deal did not even give him the majority in the Reichstag, but his coalition of Nazis and nationalists had only 248 out of 584 seats, still not a majority. So what happened? The Reichstag burned down. Interesting. Hitler wasted no time in using his newfound powers to start eliminating the competition. How did he do it? On his first day of chancellorship, Hitler manipulated Hindenburg into dissolving the Reichstag and calling for new elections. On March 5th, 1933, he hoped this would bring the Nazis closer to the majority they needed in the Reichstag to pass legislation. His goal was to pass the Enabling Act, a constitutional revision that required 2/3 majority vote, which would allow him to abolish democracy in a legal fashion so the people would actually go for it by this decree. The Nazis began a campaign to ensure that they would win all the requested seats. This is where I'm sure you guys know what propaganda is. Well, this would become a very, very prominent part of how Hitler would now have his final assertion to power. Okay. Let's take a look here. Where are we? Okay, right here. Okay. Okay, the SA celebrated Hitler's attainment on power to January 30th, 1933, a court-lit parade in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. This was actually a reenactment of August 17th, 1933, but this is what was broadcast all over Germany. Again, you could see the use of very clever and very strategic propaganda. Okay. I prophesy to you this: by appointing Hitler Chancellor of the Reich, you have handed over our sacred German fatherland to one of the greatest demagogues of all time. This evil man will cast our Reich into the abyss and bring our nation to unconceivable misery. Future generations will damn you in your grave for what you have done. This is General Erlich Ludendorff in a telegram to President Hindenburg. This was never, literally never broadcast to the German people. It's pretty much the old saying that you opened up Pandora's box or you made a deal with the devil. Very, very interesting. And you're going to see during this presentation over the next, month, well, we've got, I think after today, we've got 7 more of these webinars. That not only was Ludendorff's prophecy correct, but it was frightfully accurate on what would happen to Germany because of what they had done that appointed Hitler the leader of Germany. Okay, let's take a look at this. Okay, we have the Reichstag fire and the emergency decree. All this was manipulated by Adolf Hitler. Okay, the Reichstag fire, only February 27th, 1933. The Nazis accused the communists of the arson, as well as in attempting to overthrow the state. The Nazis would use this event to eliminate all political opposition. Okay, they literally burned it down. President Hindenburg was persuaded to issue an emergency decree invoking Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. This gave Chancellor Adolf Hitler the authority to impose dictatorial power to protect the democratic order from being overthrown by members of the Communist Party who were now arrested by the Nazis. Do you see what's happening here, class and people of this webinar? This was all manipulated by the Nazis. Hitler promised his Nazi party power, money, and control. And that's exactly what they just did. The Reichstag fire, and by the emergency decree, now Adolf Hitler, 52 days into his chancellorship, would now become the basically dictator of Germany. As he became more and more powerful, he became more and more in control of Germany. And the numbers of Germans began to amass around Hitler because he was doing something that the other people obviously didn't do. He promised to rebuild the German people. And it became very clear that if you're with the Nazis, that means you're not against them. So let's find out more about what he was actually doing. Okay, as Chancellor, Hitler's first goal was to strengthen his power, which he did. The Reichstag fire provided the excuse he needed to get the decree, as we just read. On February 27th, shortly after 9 p.m., the Reichstag fire was set ablaze and reduced to ashes. Without firm evidence, they blamed the communists, when in fact, it's now known that a Dutch anarchist was arrested and charged with arson and later executed. Did he really do it? Many people believe that maybe he didn't, but was manipulated to do it or was threatened to do it. But was the fire actually an accident? Some people believed it was not. The question remained that this was a way that Hitler would be able to blame them, the communists, and then he would assume power because of that blame and subsequent conviction. Others have concluded that it was neither the NSDAP nor the communists set the fire, but one man acting. That's what they said. In reality, they think it was much different. Regardless, the Nazis would use this event to eliminate all the political opposition. This is the excuse they needed. Okay, without firm evidence, it was put about that the fire had been set by the communists as an act of their attempt to overthrow Adolf Hitler. Hitler promised to arrest anyone responsible or everyone responsible, and as a result, communist leaders and communist Reichstag deputies were arrested. Remember, the Nazis were now the most powerful political army as well as political presence in Germany, and they became more and more powerful. Okay, a distraught and half senile Hindenburg was persuaded to issue the emergency decree for the protection of the people in the state. This emergency decree invoked Article 48, which basically gave the chancellorship and the authority to impose dictatorial power to protect the democratic order from being overthrown. This decree suspended all, now this is very important, class. This decree suspended all civil rights, including freedom of assembly and association, freedom of opinion, privacy of letter, post, telegraph, and telephone, and not guarantee private property. In addition, the national government was able to assume the powers of the state government. So in essence, what are they doing here? Hitler is now control over everything, but now he's consolidating all powers of the state, which would be given to the Nazi Party. Isn't that interesting? And who was in charge of the Nazi Party? Adolf Hitler. So this is how they did it. First, they divide, they consolidate, now they control. And that's exactly what he did. Almost immediately, the Nazis initiated a wave of terror and murder and torture that effectively cowered thousands of their political rivals. Almost all of them were communists, social democrats, and the liberals of the country. This was a way that he would consolidate power, and now he was going to firm grip it with the Nazi Party on the offensive. Now, this is something even more interesting. As you know, Germany, before all of this began, was a pretty powerful country. The people could bear arms. Check it out. On March 1, 1933, the Communist Party was banned on the grounds that they were preparing a takeover. The police and SA seized all Communist Party buildings and they seized their weapons. In the week between the fire and March 5th elections, many political opponents were arrested and taken into, quote, protective custody, interestingly enough, and detained and hastily set up concentration camps. And we're going to be hearing a lot about concentration camps as we move forward into more political control of Germany, and we're getting into the World War II years. 4,000 communist and social democrat officials were arrested, and of course, martial law was declared. What is martial law anyway? We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Hermann Göring was now in charge of the police, replaced senior police officers with SA and the SS officers, which would be later be called the Gestapo. Hitler's, quote, police. Okay, the Nazis obviously maintained, take a look at all the stuff that happened here. Here's the political parties that you can see. After March of 1933, look how much power the Nazis had in Germany. Big, big consolidation of power, and that's exactly what they wanted to do. Let's read this, class. With the March 5th elections, the Nazis had hoped to obtain an absolute majority in the Reichstag. The Reichstag had been burned. The combination of political terror and state-run propaganda again, gave the Nazis their election results. And despite the advantages of Hitler he created for himself after the Reichstag fire, the Nazis only obtained 44%, still not the majority, but Hitler was forced to maintain his coalition, but that would soon change. Hitler still needed a 2/3 majority to pass the Enabling Act, and that was his ultimate goal, and other measures would have to be taken, which they were. So he had the government, but he didn't quite have the people yet. Now, what's important to understand, you guys, and everybody out there, is that Hitler was beginning to not only eliminate his political opponents through the consolidation of power, but now he was beginning to do other things with the people through his clever use of propaganda. Did you know that in Germany, they would establish the, quote, blue-eyed master Aryan race under Hitler? Also, under the Nazi regime, they would also begin to sterilize and to control minority movements in Germany, mainly that of people who were, quote, not of Aryan German race, but also from any physical deformities. They were beginning to sterilize these people. Hitler was eliminating his opponent politically, and now, as far as all intents and purposes, morally as well, or physically. Let's continue. Okay, the end of the Weimar Republic. Hitler takes over, and you can see very clearly the consolidation of power within this. And in 1933, Hitler would pretty much have it. Okay, first concentration camp of Dachau opens on March 22nd, 1933. This would be one of many, many camps. In fact, there were huge amounts of concentration camps in Germany. And this is where Hitler would do all of his evil things and horrible things with the Jewish people. But the first thing he was doing was eliminating his internal competition of Germany. Let's read this. The first concentration camp of Dachau was opened on March 22nd, 1933, primarily as to house political opponents of the regime, and Theodor Eicke of the SS was the commandant. Hermann Göring, Minister of the Interior for the state of Prussia, came up with the idea for concentration camps to relieve overcrowding in the jails. He turned to Heinrich Himmler to build the first camp to house some 15,000 political prisoners arrested in Russia. It was built of old gunpowder factory in a town 10 miles out of Munich. This is very interesting because anybody who knows World War II, Heinrich Himmler was basically one of Hitler's top generals in the German army, which not only oversaw a lot of World War II, but also the concentration camps. Okay, in the first few years of the regime, the concentration camps were instruments of terror, controlled punishment, used for incarceration of political dissidents. Later, people were defined as what they call as social elements, including the homeless, the beggars, and the gypsies, and also were hardened criminals. So Hitler was building these concentration camps to house all of his political opponents, and then they would build more concentration camps to house more and more people. Now, keep something in mind. As he was doing all this, he was consolidating power by not only taking over more parts of the government, but also putting all of his political opponents and not, quote, Aryan Germans in prison. Then he would begin to execute people who were against him, because when you want to eliminate the competition, what's the best way to do it? Arrest and execution. In the meantime, though, if you were an Aryan proud German Nazi and joined the Nazi Party, your life would soon be getting a lot better. Remember, all this time he was doing this, he was also beginning to rebuild Germany. He would rebuild the German economy through massive public works programs, as well as consolidation of industries, which would rebuild the military. So he was putting massive quantities of people back to work. In fact, he did such a good job of that that Time magazine, a famous magazine printed in America, would name Hitler Man of the Year. But the outside world didn't really quite know at this point what he was doing in Germany and what the outcome would eventually be. Now, remember, in the United States, everybody, as well as most other parts of Europe, we were right in the middle of a major Great Depression. In fact, the United States was in bad shape, along with most of other parts of Europe. In fact, all of them. The United States was concentrating on its own problems at this point. Cascading bank collapses. Industries were failing. People were going hungry in the United States. So they were, at this point in time, the world wasn't really paying attention to what was happening in Germany that much. They were more concerned about what was happening in their country. Let's move on to this. Okay, so now we're going to look at the Enabling Act. Okay, Hitler won the office of Chancellor in a legal fashion, but he was determined to rule Germany without any restraints of a democratically elected parliament. The Enabling Act was a special power allowed by the Weimar Constitution that gave the Chancellor and his cabinet the power to pass laws by decree for a specified period of time. Isn't that interesting? Without the Reichstag involvement, it was only to be used in times of emergency. Because it altered the Constitution, passing the Enabling Act required 2/3 of majority vote of the Reichstag. This was achieved by Nazi maneuvering. This Enabling Act gave Hitler's government the dictatorial powers for 4 years. That would obviously be amended in the future. As Hitler became more and more powerful, more and more people were forced to be with him. Sort of like, it was like saying, if you knew what was good for you, you'd join the Nazi party, because if you didn't, you were considered to be an enemy of the state, and it could mean some very, very bad things. And also during this period of time, the old Nazi salute to Adolf Hitler as the Führer of Germany would become pretty much standard order. If you did not salute the Führer, you were considered to be a traitor, and you could be in very serious trouble. So now it was more or less, we're going to rule by fear, but we're also going to rule the fact that look at what we're doing for you anyway. So if you were not a loyal Nazi, you had reason to either change your political affiliations very quickly, or you better not get caught. That was pretty much the feeling. Okay. In addition to the essay, line the hallways and aisles of a makeshift chamber chanting full power or else, and we want the bill or there will be fire and more murder. Scare tactics intimidated many deputies into voting for the bill. It became very clear. You're either with the Führer and the Nazi party, or you're not with them, which means that you would be considered an enemy of the state. Remember, everybody, Hitler had the Nazi party, he had the military, and he had now a growing majority of people. When people started to see what he was doing, and they started to see an improvement of their own lives, they began to support him, simply because he was making Germany what they wanted to become anyway, a superior power, but certainly not through violence and intimidation, but through good governance. And for the most part, from an economic standpoint, Hitler was considered to be a miracle worker in the early 1930s. In fact, there were many people believed that Germany had been basically as what they referred to as the German economic miracle. He took a country that was beaten, bankrupt, humiliated, and in trouble, and in only 3 years after he became power, he rebuilt Berlin and the entire country to the envy of the entire world. In fact, in 1936, the World Olympic Games were held in Berlin, and the achievements of the Nazi Party were showcased to the entire world. They didn't understand everything that was happening in Germany. They didn't realize that the Jewish people were being excluded from everything, and that many thousands of people at this point were now being rounded up and put in jail, because if you're not with the Nazis, it means you're against us. You're against Hitler's movement for its people. Therefore, you're an enemy of the state. Very clever way of manipulating this thing politically through the areas of propaganda. Okay, so this Enabling Act is very important, and eventually it would be because of that, Hitler would now have full power. And the Night of Long Knives. Oh, this is very important, everybody. Please listen. This is very, very important. The term stormtroopers in brown shirts, who were thugs who Hitler had used to help him come to power, they organized in 1921 as Hitler's private army, defending Nazi meetings and attacking opponents. Ernst Röhm's Hitler's good friend became supreme commander in 1931. And look at this. In 1934, they had 4.5 million members strong, by far the most powerful in Germany. Hitler liked Rome. He had been one of his first supporters. Rome had taken part in the beer hall that we learned about the first night, who tried to overthrow Germany, and they organized in 1921. By early 1934, after Hitler became powerful in Germany, the SA's usefulness as a violent, threatening revolutionary force had effectively come to an end. However, Hitler now needed to support the regular army generals and the big industry leaders to rebuild Germany after the Great Depression, and to rearm Germany with ultimately accomplish his long-range goals. He realized that he needed this, and his long-range goal of seizing more living space for the German people. This is what would begin to push Germany into war. Remember the Treaty of Versailles, everybody. What was taken away from Germany? It would be Austria, and it would be parts of Czechoslovakia. That made Hitler very angry. In fact, that was one of the reasons why he became powerful in the first place, because he promised that Germany would get its territory back. People were still counting on that. Okay, powerful supporters of Hitler had been complaining about Rome for some time, and was afraid that the SA would absorb the much smaller German army into its ranks, and Rome would become its overall leader. Industrialists who had provided the funds for the Nazi victory were unhappy with Rome's socialistic views on the economy and his claims that the real revolution had still to take place. Many people in the party also disapproved of the fact that Rome had other leaders who were homosexuals. That was a big no-no back in those days. Okay, the average German also feared and disliked the brown shirts because they were arrogant, gangster-like behavior, and such extorting money from local shop owners, driving around in fancy new cars to show off, getting drunk, as well as beating up and murdering innocent civilians. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Hitler was aware that Rome and the SA had power and had the power to remove him as leader, so Hitler ordered Rome's destruction in what would become the Rome push of the Night of Long Knives. Remember, absolute power corrupts absolutely. This was a guy who supported Hitler, but he became too drunk for power himself. He thought Hitler was going to give him more power. He didn't. Hitler began to view him as a threat. Now look what happened here. In the early morning hours of June 30th, 1934, SS forces, followed by Adolf Hitler himself, burst into a country inn near Munich, where Rome and his staff had gathered together for a general conference. Rome and his staff were literally dragged out of their beds and taken to Stadelheim prison near Munich, where Rome and his entire followers were summarily executed. This is how Hitler would now deal with his political enemies. If you didn't go the way he wanted you, exactly the way he wanted you to, he just simply came out and killed you. For Ernst Röhm, on Hitler's order, he had been given a pistol containing a single bullet to commit suicide, but he refused to do it, saying that if I am to be killed, let Hitler do it himself. Two SS officers, one of whom was Theodor Eicke, commander of the Truppenkopf guards at Dachau, entered Röhm's cell after waiting 15 minutes and shot him point blank range. Reportedly, Röhm's last were Mein Führer, or my Führer. There was Führer cleansing the Berlin. Okay, this is where all the things were starting to consolidate for Hitler. Everybody knew at that point that Hitler was a very powerful person, and his rise to power at that point was fairly complete. Let's continue to read the rest of this. It's an intriguing story because it's basically about murder, manipulation, propaganda, and, well, essentially what it would happen is that it was a very sad thing for the German people about what ultimately what would happen to these people. Hitler rewarded the SS for its role by raising the SS to independent status as an organization, no longer a part of the SA. Again, the leader Heinrich Himmler was now answer to Hitler, but no one else. Reinhard Heydrich was promoted to what they call the lieutenant general. Rome was replaced by Victor Lutz as head of the SA, but from this time on, the brown shirts would be diminished and all what would be disappearing of them were inducted into the regular army after Hitler reintroduced military conscription in 1935. Only on July 13th, Hitler gave a long speech to the Nazi-controlled Reichstag in which he announced that 74 had been shot and justified the murders. Okay. I'm not going to go ahead and read the quote, but it was pretty much for German people, for German justice. We're stronger without them. We needed to consolidate for the power and the control of Germany, blah, 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 blah. Hitler was a master at giving these speeches. In fact, I hope people have probably heard some of the speeches, although you probably don't understand it in German, but you could see very clearly during all this period of time that Hitler would give a lot of speeches, talking about German nationally, talking about German unity, talking about the greatness of the German nation, the greatness of the German people, and that he alone was going to bring greatness and truth and wealth and power and status to the German people. And the interesting thing, class, is that during this period of time, he actually was doing it. So the more powerful he became, the more power he would now start to amass. He was putting food on people's table, he was increasing the quality of their lives, and he was consolidating power even more. Okay, by proclaiming himself as supreme judge of the German people, Hitler in effect placed himself above the law, making his word the law, and thus instilled a permanent sense of fear in the German people. That's kind of a misquote there. In fear in some of the German people, because a lot of the German people, they liked what he was doing. And the reason being is because their lives were better under a communist, or I'm sorry, under a fascist Nazi regime. The German army generals, by condoning the unprecedented events of the Night of the Long Knives, effectively cast their lot with Hitler and began the long journey with him that would eventually lead them to the brink of world conquest. That's true. Hitler would become very, very powerful. The German nation would become powerful. And why did he become powerful? Why did the German nation become powerful? Because they were rebuilding their military. While all this was going on, the German economy was taking off. And the military was getting more and more powerful. And the reason being is because he rebuilt them. And because of the act of rebuilding the military, literally millions of people went back to work. Not only that, but he had public works projects like the Autobahn, new electrical grid, new water reservoirs, all these different projects that would not only put people to work and put money on the table, but it was consolidating more and more power for Hitler because people actually liked what he was doing. They didn't agree with him politically on a lot of the things. They were getting a benefit from it. Okay. The German conspirators who attempted to overthrow Hitler and the Nazi regime from 1938 to 1944 never forgot the June 30 massacre. Many held it up as proof that Hitler would stop at nothing to achieve his demonic ends and could be removed in the same manner. Didn't quite happen. Okay, this is what's going on. Nazi intentions would now be revealed. What was their ultimate goal, everybody? Hitler's ultimate goal was essentially world conquest. But how was he going to do it? First thing is he had to take care of the stuff at home, which he was doing. Anti-Jewish policies, boycott of Jewish shops, Nazi book burnings. This is to eliminate all competition within Germany, so Hitler would not allow anybody with any independent thought that was different from what he was thinking about as the Nazi leader of the Führer of the German people. he would have these huge political rallies where hundreds of thousands of people all over Germany, and more than that, would gather in these huge gatherings and shout pro-Nazi slogans, Hail, Heil Hitler. He would make a fantastic speech about the wonderfulness of the German people, the German nation, the unity, and all the great things that they were going to do. But also the fact is that he would solidify his power by essentially not only repudiating the Treaty of Versailles as being unfair to Germany, which it was, but that would strengthen the anti-Jewish sentiment among the German people. Interestingly enough, all these things were leading to one inevitable and very sad conclusion to this, what they were actually going to do. The people of Germany didn't understand that what Hitler was ultimately going to do, which was get us, begin World War II. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look here. Okay, Hitler becomes the Fuhrer on August 2nd, 1934. This is when his final rise to power, which would give him almost unlimited power in Germany. Upon Hindenburg's death on August 2nd, 1934, Hitler combined the offices of President, Head of State, and Chancellor, and assumed the title of Fuhrer and the Third Reich Chancellor. The day of Hindenburg's death, the cabinet ordered a direct vote on August 19th in order for the German people to approve the combination of the two offices. 95% of all registered voters in Germany went to the polls and gave Hitler the 38 million votes, which he did. Hitler could now claim that he was the Führer of the German nation with an overwhelming approval of the people. How did he do it? Like we just been learning about. Consolidation of power, propaganda, murdering and jailing his opponents. And if you don't do what Hitler decides you should do, that means you're an enemy of the Nazi state, the Third Reich, and we will eliminate you anyway. But also the fact is that he was starting to improve the lives of millions of German people through public works programs, rebuilding the military, and providing work and work opportunities and money to the German people. He knew exactly how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, and he knew why to do it. People were watching, and they overwhelmingly approved this. Okay, the following day of August 20th, 1934, the cabinet decreed by the law of the allegiance of civil servants and soldiers and of the armed services or the armed forces, all public employees, the military, civil service, police, teachers, and the judiciary now had to take the loyalty of oath or the oath of loyalty, not to the Constitution, not to the country, but to Adolf Hitler himself, the Fuhrer. The Nazis' top jurists proclaimed that in the old days we used to ask, what is the law? Now we only ask, what does the Fuhrer want? Thus Hitler became the state of the Germans, and Germans transferred their customary difference and loyalty from the German nation to Hitler personally. In essence, he was pretty much God at that point. Hitler came to power legally, but not as a result of election victory or any wave of popular enthusiasm. Hitler assumed the reins of government only within the assistance of the old conservative elites, who naively continued to believe that Hitler would pay them deference. Interesting. What Hitler gave his break was a colossal miscalculation that Hitler could, as a junior politician, be tamed. Absolutely not. Once in office, Hitler proved to be uncontrollable. He astounded and overwhelmed those who felt that they trapped him. Hitler made legal what others considered to be illegal. Sensible people were sure that Hitler could not last long. They were definitely wrong about that. Remember, Hitler controlled not only the military, but he controlled the flow of information through the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Propaganda. I mean, everything was under his control. He could control everything. What followed was a terrifying indictment of power, of human indifference and passivity. This was really terrible, you guys. So you guys, we're basically done for the day. But when Hitler would become powerful like this is exactly what people in governments don't want. Because I'm going to ask you one question, class, and I'm going to turn it over to Ivy and answer some questions. Why is it bad to consolidate all power to one person? So, Annie, do you want to take over from here? I'm pretty much done with the webinar, so I'm open for questions. I hope this was informative. I hope I didn't go too fast, but there was a lot to cover tonight, and I wanted to make sure that this is how Hitler came to power. So please, I'm open for discussions. So take it away.
Okay. Any questions?
How come the Treaty of Versailles has no punishment for Germany? Because they basically rebuilt their whole economy, and the Treaty of Versailles didn't do anything.
Okay, yeah, okay. The Treaty of Versailles was meant to punish Germany and meant to blame them and make them pay for everything, and they did. The Treaty of Versailles punished Germany severely. And because of that punishment, this is why Adolf Hitler would get his platform to eventually assume the power that we went over today. But as the Great Depression burst on the world scene and everybody was in far worse condition, they were not in any power politically or financially to enforce the Treaty of Versailles. And Hitler would not have any part of it. He said, look, the Treaty of Versailles was an insult and a complete degradation to the German way of life and the German people. We don't care about the Treaty of Versailles. We're going to simply ignore it, and which is exactly what he did. When the European leaders became aware of his ascension to the power and what he was doing to Germany by increasing their economy, increasing their people's wealth, thereby increasing their material wealth and military, they were not in any position to stop him. So as Hitler became more and more powerful because of what he was doing, Europe wouldn't dare stand in his way. And after 1936, when everybody realized what he had done, Europe was in absolutely no condition to stop him or even complain about it. They began to become afraid of him.
Thank you for answering my question.
So basically my question is just that, so it's just out of curiosity for what I'm learning currently at school right now.
Mhm.
So what was there a particular reason why Hitler broke the treaty or the alliance between Stalin when he rose to power during the Russian Revolution?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, very good question. Okay, why he broke that was, it became very clear. Hitler realized that Russia would become a very powerful enemy if they were treated wrongly, okay? Now remember, they had the alliance with Germany, and Russia would have this alliance where they would have a peace treaty. But Hitler would break that because of World War II. Now they asked the question is, why did they break it? Why did Hitler break that alliance? Because he realized that if he was going to control Europe in its entirety and would eventually control the world, he would have to be able to control Russia. He realized that Russia would never give him or never give in to his demands. Hitler was a very crafty individual, but he had a gross miscalculation on this. He thought he could actually beat Russia in a fair fight or unfair fight. He was dead wrong on that one. He grossly miscalculated the power of Russia, but he also didn't think it out strategically. Because when he would attack Russia during World War II, he didn't realize that, one, Russia was a large country geographically. There's hundreds of miles between cities to conquer or to beat in a fight. He didn't realize that the Siberian winters in Russia get 30 below zero and his troops would freeze to death. But also the fact is that he would go into Russia because he couldn't get England to capitulate to his demands. And this is what got him thinking, I can't beat England because of the problem with that England would not surrender. So Hitler decided, okay, let's go to Russia and let's go the other way. Now remember something that's very important, Daniel, is that he had already had the Axis power agreements with Japan. Now Japan had already beaten Russia in a war in 1905. So he was counting on the Japanese coming in from the east. He would go to the west and Russia would surrender. But what he didn't understand is that when the Japanese would bomb Pearl Harbor, that brought the United States into this thing, that screwed him all up. In fact, Hitler was absolutely furious with the Japanese emperor and the General Tojo for doing this, because he realized that he's not going to beat the United States alone. And he was very worried about the United States being able to handle America as well. When the Japanese brought the US into the war after Pearl Harbor, he was furious because he told him, he says, look, I didn't get enough chance to defeat Russia. Now you bring the United States in, you ruined it for us. And that's exactly what happened. He actually broke the Treaty of Russia because he thought he could beat him. And the fact is, he couldn't. He didn't count on Russia's resilience. He didn't count on the fact that his troops didn't think through logistically about what Russia was capable of, and the winters and the logistical problems with supplying his army to enough supplies to beat Russia. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. If you take a look at Germany, take a look at Russia, what do you see that's different? Size. There is no way a country the size of Germany can defeat a country the size of Russia. In fact, if you take a look at both Axis nations, or actually three of them, if you want to count Italy, which is kind of, not really. But if you count Germany, the size of Germany and the size of Japan, you've got an area less than the size of Texas in the United States. Trying to figure out how you're going to beat a country the size of Russia and a country the size of the United States. Countries with almost unlimited natural resources and financial power, even though we didn't have it, but we would certainly change that in a very short order, and the size of their armies. There was no way he could win this. And it was extremely arrogant on his part to assume that he could. Hitler's biggest mistakes, two of them, breaking the treaty with Russia and attacking them, and then declaring war on the United States after the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Empire. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good. Yep.
So thank you so much.
Certainly. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to get into what Hitler would actually do for the German people, rebuilding the military. We're going to get into some specifics about that. And then we're going to start looking at other things like the Night of Broken Glass, the persecution of the Jewish people, and then we would get into the beginning of the World War II years. So we've got a lot to cover yet. World War II will become a major topic of this discussion about Adolf Hitler and the German World War II era. So thank you very much for having me. I hope everybody has a great evening. Take care.
Thank you.